Got to a point with my agent, who was a big-time agent, I was with a long time, and my manager just said, we can't represent you anymore. I said, why? Well, because you're conservative and you're a Christian, and I was like, what? And I said, this is an industry that screams more than anybody else for tolerance. You have to be tolerant. You have to be, freedom of speech. And now all that stuff is completely a one-way street.
So hello everyone from the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, and today we are talking about Hollywood, more so why some conservatives say their conservative political beliefs really exclude them from having like a really successful career in Hollywood. Now, the people who seem to complain about this the most are people who maybe had a part in like a big movie or have some fame from starring in TV shows, but then they don't have a really successful career going forward. And obviously there are two options that we can believe. One, they aren't really that talented and so they weren't successful, or they were actually blacklisted for their political beliefs, because that's what the crew of the Daily Wire often say, because so many of them were aspiring talent in Hollywood, or actually were in Hollywood for a tiny bit before becoming like actors in a different way, being conservative propagandists. But I just want to talk about this a bit more because I made a whole video about the Daily Wire, specifically like Brett Cooper and Michael Knowles being like failed actors, Ben Shapiro being a failed Hollywood screenwriter. But mainly I want to talk about like the landscape of Hollywood, how it's changed from like conservative to more liberal, but also make the point that if you are a talented conservative, you can still easily be a successful actor in Hollywood. But also, the problem being is that conservative strength is in their unity. And now conservatives are going so far right, they're going so mask off far right, you really just cannot ignore their terrible beliefs and how that might actually affect a working space as well. Because you rarely see any prominent conservatives dissent against the common narrative. For example, Mitt Romney is a terrible person. If most conservative people acted like Mitt Romney, I doubt they'd have as many problems. If Gina Carano acted like Mitt Romney, she would still be on The Mandalorian. Do you know what I'm saying? But because she has gone on like crazy far-right rants on social media, that's why Disney want nothing to do with her. It really goes beyond just being like a stereotypical conservative. It is really just having these far-right opinions. But we're going to talk about all of that today, and we're also going to talk about like successful conservatives in Hollywood, just to disprove the myth from people like Kevin Sorbo that conservatives are blacklisted from actually getting good roles in Hollywood, because it seems they actually aren't. But anyway, before we go any further, please like the video, and in the comments let me know who is the biggest baby when it comes to this stuff. Like, we have like Kevin Sorbo, we have Ben Shapiro, we have a couple others who say they couldn't have a really good career in Hollywood because they're conservative. Let me know down in the comments. Also follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on Twitter, but also on Instagram. Instagram is where I'm posting about my travels all around Southeast Asia, and I've been documenting it pretty well, and I've archived out all of my highlight reels on my profile page. So if you care about what I've been up to over the last 6 months, go check that out. Also, for more travel content, I have posted some exclusive videos on my Patreon page, and I do have another one coming out soon. And other benefits include getting access to the Discord server and also getting access to my Nintendo Switch friend code. If you care about any of that stuff, I want to build up as many $1 to $3 patrons as possible, so go check that out. And also check out my subreddit and check out my second channel down in the description. So I said I wanted to talk a little bit about the Daily Wire crew, and why I want to talk about this is because I want to like kind of circle back to this later. So like I said, Brett Cooper and Michael Knowles were actors in Hollywood shows, I guess. So Brett Cooper was in some sort of like Heathers TV show. You know the popular movie Heathers with Christian Slater? They made a series that was apparently pretty bad, and Brett Cooper had like a significant role on that. Michael Knowles, I don't think has been in anything good. He was in The Nick as like an extra in one episode. It seems like he's just done a lot of smaller movies, but hadn't actually been a successful Hollywood conservative. And then of course we all know the story about Ben Shapiro. Apparently he knew some producer in Hollywood who read one of his screenplays about like some sort of comedy set in Harvard, thought it was quite good, and tried to send it off to people, who got back to him saying that basically Ben Shapiro was blacklisted because he was like a fairly prominent conservative, even as a young person. So out of these three, the only successful one kind of was Brett Cooper, but she wasn't doing anything special. And of course, if you go work for the Daily Wire, a couple months ago, they offered Steven Crowder a $50 million contract. So for Brett Cooper, being some conservative propagandist is probably far more easy money than trying to be a successful Hollywood actor. So it makes all the sense in the world. But of course, these people must have some acting talent, and I guess that really informs their performances as these conservative talking heads. But I think Ben Shapiro is a better example because Michael Knowles and Brett Cooper must have some talent to actually get any roles in the first place. Hollywood is very, very competitive. So I'll say that about them. With Ben Shapiro, he firmly believes his screenplay never got made into anything because he was blacklisted for being a conservative. And why I find that to be the most ridiculous out of all of them is that his media opinions are just so terrible, right? So we made that video about The Last of Us, where he was complaining about The Last of Us not being a show about zombies. And he was saying, like, I don't need this gay love story in episode 3. I want my zombies. A zombie show should be about zombies. That is one of his more recent ones. But then, of course, he was saying why he didn't like The Batman, why he didn't like Knives Out, Glass Onion. And of course, there is nothing wrong with not liking certain films. Absolutely. Everyone has their own taste. You cannot like anything. The problem is, I think sometimes, especially if you're supposedly into like the art form of cinema or TV, sometimes criticisms are bad. Sometimes criticisms are very, very dumb. And Ben Shapiro's criticisms are very bad and very dumb because, like, The Last of Us one, right, for example, at episode 3 of The Last of Us, criticizing it not mainly being about zombies is just so stupid because you've clearly missed the whole point of the show. And like I said in my video about that, I thought it'd become a meme that Zombie Thing is not about zombies. Because pretty much now, everything to do with zombies isn't actually about zombies anymore. But Ben Shapiro seemingly has missed the memo, so he has this terrible criticism. And of course, he has also written like these books, which are like Tom Clancy style, like knockoff books, basically. And apparently they're also terrible. So I firmly believe the reason Ben Shapiro probably didn't succeed as a screenplay writer is because he's just a terrible writer. His ideas were bad. And this is proven by how he acts after the fact he got rejected by Hollywood. But there is some truth to the notion that Hollywood is now more liberal than it used to be. And as someone who is left-wing and is not liberal, I'm happy to criticize liberal Hollywood as kind of like this bubble and a hive mind, because that is true to a certain extent. Because how many Hollywood actors do you know who will take like a more liberal position? How much does that really have a limit? So for example, if you guys follow US politics, think about Bernie Sanders versus Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton. How many of your favorite celebs, liberal celebs, sided with Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders? Most people did. It's very rare to see a lot of people endorse Bernie Sanders for president. And then you had Joe Biden versus Bernie Sanders. How many of your favorite celebs preferred Joe Biden to Bernie Sanders? And that really shows that they might be liberal in that they don't hate like trans people or gay people and they tolerate them, but they're not necessarily like these woke communists as people at the Daily Wire would have you believe. And there's obviously like the limits on what they would criticize. So you have two Marvel actors, you have Mark Ruffalo and you have Chris Evans, right? So both of these people will criticize Republicans all day, criticize Donald Trump, but when it comes to something like the matter of US support for Israel, Mark Ruffalo will call that out, and he has been doing that recently, while Chris Evans will star in a propaganda film that makes Mossad look great. And although what Chris Evans did and his silence relatively on like Israel in general, despite starring in this movie, despite that being worse, people in Hollywood will treat Mark Ruffalo worse because of what he said. Because that's kind of like the liberal Hollywood bubble. But also, Hollywood was firmly conservative for decades and decades. And the most famous stars of the day were pretty much conservatives, like Jimmy Stewart, very, very famous, close friend of Ronald Reagan, very conservative guy. John Wayne, very conservative guy. And all the movies, because of things like the Hays Code, and because they were being made by conservatives, often promoted a very conservative worldview, depicted historical events in a very, very conservative way. Although I do like films, I won't say I'm a massive fan of older films. There are some good ones, like East of Eden And you guys probably have all watched It's a Wonderful Life, which stars a conservative and is actually made by a conservative director as well. So there are even some good old Hollywood films like involving conservatives. But by and large, why these older films are often good is because of the spectacle, like all these extras and like these massive battle scenes. A lot of these big budget early films starring like John Wayne and stuff, or films that deal with more like complex political themes, aren't really that interesting because of the restrictions at the time. Contrast that to a couple years later with like early Martin Scorsese films, like I really like Mean Streets, for example, and it's just night and day like how much more creative these films are. And it's no wonder that audiences started to gravitate towards liberal Hollywood because they were more talented, and it's more interesting to tell stories with less restrictions rather than abide to like anti-communist conservative worldviews and government regulators run by conservatives. So although Ben Shapiro might have had more success as a screenplay writer in the 1950s, that doesn't mean the quality would have been better. And of course, even though we say liberal Hollywood, that's just more like artsy types. It's not like Hollywood has been run by communists since the 1970s or something. A lot of these people are still like liberal capitalists. They are still very, very pro-American despite criticizing the system, but they often just make interesting movies. I thought it was interesting to talk about the history of how conservatives had a grip on Hollywood, mainly thanks to the government and like these big studio execs, and how that switched and how people do just like liberal art better because liberal art is better. And I fully believe being left-wing can really help you make better art because you're going to challenge the status quo, you're going to make a commentary on society that conservatives would often be uncomfortable with making because it would fly in the face of their own beliefs about the status quo. Now, on that note, I want to talk about one of the most infamous conservative actors. Infamous because he won't stop crying about how he didn't have a great career because he's conservative, but he's not actually a very good actor. He's not really infamous in the way Mel Gibson is for like crazy scandals and stuff. So Kevin Sorbo is not someone I was aware of for anything remarkable. I pretty much only knew him as someone who's in those God's Not Dead movies, and he plays like that atheist university professor who like gets run over by a car at the end of the movie and like the whole town celebrate it. And does he start believing in God at the end? I don't really remember. But anyway, why Kevin Sorbo is probably famous to you is because he just goes on Twitter and writes crazy stuff. He goes on Newsmax, he goes on Fox News, and he says a load of crazy stuff as well. He's just a conservative talking head. And I was thinking, like, did this guy actually have a successful career? Does he have a right to feel aggrieved at supposed liberal Hollywood? It turns out he's basically never starred in anything remarkable apart from some TV movies and a TV show about Hercules where he played Hercules, right? So you guys might have watched that growing up. Maybe in America you are more culturally aware of the greatness of Kevin Sorbo, but at the same time, when I look through his IMDb, which happens to be the case with people like Brett Cooper and Michael Knowles as well, I'm like, you were never successful anyway, so what are you crying about that Hollywood has like censored you for being conservative? Now, of course, Kevin Sorbo has also frequented PragerU, and I just want to take a look at this video he did there talking about how basically he was run out of Hollywood for being a conservative.
The difference today, I think, is back then to compare to now. I think you've got to play even more of a game now. You got to be ready to, I think, bite your lip more than ever in the climate that's going on in America today, the climate that's going on in the world, because you've got this whole woke thing and this cancel culture where people come after you and it can tear you down for something you said 30 years ago, which is insane to me. But I didn't notice it until I got up to Canada, where I filmed my second series, Andromeda. And I started noticing more on the set there when two of the actors on the show found out I was conservative, and they said, "You're Republican, you're against education." And I went, "I'm against education?" I said, "What?" I said, that blew my mind. I was at a charity golf event out in Palm Springs, and I said something, and one of the guys pulls me aside. He says, "Are you conservative?" I said, "Why are we talking like we're doing a drug deal over here in the corner?" You know, because he pulled me in the corner of the clubhouse we were sitting in. In 2010, there were a couple of incidents that I just said, okay, I've had enough of this. And I remember going back to my wife and saying, I've had enough of the hypocrisy where nobody's pointing it out. And I started getting more vocal. Of course, we had all these, social media was starting to grow in its infancy, but we started to take off. And I started saying stuff. My wife said, "You better look out, they're gonna come after you." And I said, all I said was 2 + 2 is 4. I spoke the truth, that's just truth. But she was right. And it got to a point with my agent, who was a big-time agent, I was with a long time, and my manager just said, we can't represent you anymore. I said, why? Well, because you're conservative and you're a Christian and I was like, what? And I said, this is an industry that screams more than anybody else for tolerance. You have to be tolerant. You have to be, freedom of speech. And now all that stuff is completely a one-way street. It's like, you say what we say, or you're out. You're out of the club.
So just like with Ben Shapiro, do you actually believe his agent said, I can't represent you anymore because you're a conservative Christian? Do you honestly think that his agent said that to him? Are there not conservative Christians in Hollywood right now? Like, he's not the conventional conservative. Chris Pratt, Arnold Schwarzenegger, they're conservative Christians, are they not? There is a lot of other examples as well, like Vince Vaughn, Mel Gibson. Aren't they conservative Christians as well? I find it hard to believe your agent would drop you suddenly in 2010 because you're a conservative Christian. No, Kevin Sorbo, like so many people who complain about being blacklisted in Hollywood, it's not that you're a conservative, it's not that you believe in God, it's that your political opinions are actually pretty extreme and you basically just parrot whatever the Republican Party of the day say. There's no independent thought to your conservatism, there's no principles to your conservatism, it's just basically saying whatever the popular thing is, and that's what they continue to do today. And then they're surprised that liberal Hollywood doesn't want to hire them when they literally say the most disgusting things. Like, think about what Michael Knowles has recently been saying, right? If Chris Pratt started saying that, if Arnold Schwarzenegger started saying that, they would probably be out of a job pretty quick. They probably wouldn't be hired as much anymore. But in their conservatism, they don't say stuff like that, and they don't say really hateful stuff which would make everyone uncomfortable on a set, because it is very diverse in Hollywood. So that's why you don't get jobs anymore. So like Gina Carano, for example, posting all that like anti-Semitic stuff on her Instagram page, that goes far beyond I'm a conservative Christian. It's that I'm a very hateful bigot. And we can argue about, like, conservatism fundamentally being that, but we can also admit there are more like moderate Republicans, moderate conservatives. Like I said, if these people just acted more like Mitt Romney from like 2012 or something, I don't think they'd run into many problems in Hollywood, if I'm honest. It's because they always pander to this extreme reactionary crowd on like Fox News, now like Breitbart, Daily Wire, Newsmax and stuff. That's why I can imagine this agent not wanting to represent him anymore, not because he thinks, oh, you're a typical conservative Christian, so I'm going to drop you. But then we can also just say, this conversation probably never happened. His agent might have just dropped him because he just wasn't worth the hassle, because he's not talented enough, so he wasn't getting many offers, and to the agent, he wasn't going to get much money from working for Kevin Sorbo. It would be nice if the people who constantly talk about personal responsibility actually take some personal responsibility and stop deflecting and pretending all their problems are the result of some liberal boogeyman. But also on another note, there's another actress I saw when I was researching this video called Julian Davis. Now, she is somewhat famous for being in Eyes Wide Shut, but just like with all of these actors, she's in Eyes Wide Shut. That movie came out decades ago, and that's what she's still known for, because she did not have a successful career, and seemingly now she blames it on liberal Hollywood. So I saw this on a YouTube video on Fox News. It's from 2017. I'm just going to read you the article she wrote herself. So, Eyes Wide Shut actress, I came out as conservative in Hollywood. Here's the story of what happened next. So, about a year ago, I made one of the more risky decisions of my life, one that I knew could hurt my career as an actress. I decided to come out of the conservative closet and admit to my peers that I was a conservative in Hollywood. This person has done like nothing notable since Eyes Wide Shut, and she only came out as a conservative in 2016, and she's like saying her career is threatened because of that. Her career was going nowhere anyway, and this is probably why she wrote this in the first place. Yet, hard as it is for some to believe, not everyone in the entertainment industry on the left coast is a left-winger. An acquaintance had asked me to write for a right-of-centre political magazine. I realised I would be outing myself by doing it, but I ended up writing a dozen articles with a right-leaning libertarian slant that were well received. Sadly, the magazine closed and I was faced with two options. Option one, I could start apologising to all my Hollywood liberal friends and associates who'd been shocked by my writing and tell them I didn't really mean it. Option two, I could have the courage of my convictions and continue down the conservative path. But I knew if I took option one, that I would have to never speak or post anything that even squeaked of conservatism again. I would have to nod and agree with all the constant comments and wild accusations against President Trump, the racist, the misogynist, the one who's trying to destroy the world, sigh. This is my point proven, right? She's writing articles that are very pro-Trump, saying that he's basically not a racist or a misogynist. This is when he was president. We knew all this stuff. All those things had come out against him. It's not that these were people's opinions of policy or interpreting policies as a certain way. They're literally comments from Trump himself. So it's perfectly reasonable for people not to feel comfortable with you if you support someone like Trump. It goes beyond just being a conservative. There's obviously like conservatives at the Lincoln Project who hate Donald Trump, for example, but they're staking their reputation on promoting like a far-right president and then crying when supposedly liberal Hollywood doesn't like that. So going on to say, so being the person I am, I chose the second option. I refuse to be a coward and be untrue to myself. I believe my path to be the most honest, albeit more painful option. Since then, I haven't fared well. My unfriendings on social media have been many, including even my best friend. It is interesting to note that all of them just stopped calling and quietly ghosted me and later unfriended me. Needless to say, I learned to tune the abuse out. What's interesting is that I noticed a particular upsurge in unfriendings immediately after Charlottesville, and of course I know why. The media of choice for the left all reported the incident in such a way to make it appear that all Trump supporters are far right. See, again, it's a conservative hive mind. If you're a conservative who goes along with everything the mainstream GOP say, no matter what, no matter how far they go to the far right, then you cannot complain when people don't like you for allegedly being a conservative, because the overturn window, although being crazily right-wing in America, has of course shifted to the far right so much in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So if you're saying you support the president and you're actually saying stuff about Charlottesville, again, you couldn't be surprised even if you were blacklisted from Hollywood, but this person clearly hasn't been, because like I said, they haven't had a successful career in decades. So she finished the article by saying, as for the others, I'm not going to back down and lie to get ahead, but I know that staying true to my conservative beliefs means they'll steer clear of me so as not to be sullied with the association, much like my so-called friends who ditched me. Bearing this in mind, I can see that I'll have to take my career into my own hands in trying to find producers and funding for my own screenplay to get my film cast, shot, produced, and distributed. As one very high up industry person said to me recently, get back in the closet if you want to get that film made. So just like Kevin Sorbo basically blaming the industry for her not having a moderately successful career. But the funny thing is, she wrote this in 2017 after only coming out as conservative in 2016. But her career had not taken off in the decades between Eyes Wide Shut and whatever she is doing now. So I find this really hard to believe. But even if there are people who don't want to work with her because she was a massive Trump supporter, I think that is fair enough when you're supporting a candidate who was so masked off about his hatred to other people. But also I think this plays into another thing. Because I don't have a hard time believing that people don't want to work with this woman because she's a Trump supporter, I also know that if she was super talented, I don't think they'd really even care. So Mel Gibson is a great example. And although his career has never recovered properly, he's still employed to act, he's still employed to direct. He even got nominated for multiple Oscars for Hacksaw Ridge, right? This guy, who is both deeply religious, conservative, and has also had a history of saying insanely racist and misogynistic things, he's still employed, he still gets jobs because the studio know Mel Gibson can draw an audience and Mel Gibson can make them a film that will make them money, because for all his terrible personal failings, he is actually a really talented actor and director. So a lot of studios who just exist to make money, they don't care about that and they think most people have forgotten about it. So they still hire Mel Gibson, despite the fact that he's not only a conservative Christian, he's a mask off basically every kind of bigot you can imagine, and he still gets jobs. So a lot of these people complaining, I think it's a mixture of things. It's a mixture of they're not talented and also them towing like more extremist lines in like conservative rhetoric, but they don't have the talent for people to overlook that. So it's like, you're not worth the hassle if you're going to come out and say terrible things and make our movie look bad, so I'm not going to hire you. But like with Lewis, she hasn't starred anything good in years. Like Kevin Sorbo hasn't starred anything good in years. So why would people even bother? And on that note, another person who is pretty conservative but has had a very, very successful career is Gary Sinise. And of course, Gary Sinise is most famous for Forrest Gump, but he's had a pretty good career as an open conservative in Hollywood. If you type in Gary Sinise into YouTube, you can find interviews of him even on Newsmax. But because he seems like an okay guy, does a lot of charity work for like veterans and stuff, people like him still, even though he's conservative. And I just want to read an article that came out recently as well, came out in January this year. Gary Sinise talks being conservative in Hollywood. So Sinise has been publicly open about his political views, even starting Friends of Abe, a conservative group for Hollywood figures, in 2004. When asked if conservatives in the entertainment industry need a support group, the Criminal Minds actor laughed in response, saying it was formed during the early days of the Iraq War. I think so much was motivated by what happened to Vietnam veterans and the lack of support they got and the way they were treated, and we regretted it later on. I didn't want our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans to fall prey to any of that kind of stuff. I just wanted to get in there and support them. So I started looking for people that were just in the same camp as me on that subject, and I found other folks in the movie and television business who enjoyed getting together. When asked about if he could have had a bigger Hollywood career if he focused on acting, he said he had some great opportunities and he can't complain about his acting career. I've done some amazing things, I've worked with amazing people, and it really played a major role, if not the key element, in what I'm doing on the service side. He's saying there he's basically dedicated his public life to like helping veterans and stuff like that, but he's also been very publicly conservative for nearly like 2 decades, and the only reason he hasn't been as prolific as other actors is because he focused more on like the charity stuff rather than his acting career. But even he says there, you know, I've had a great career. I've been very blessed for my career because he's a talented actor and he's not a complete nutcase like so many of these conservatives who complain about being blacklisted from Hollywood. If all conservatives get blacklisted from Hollywood, why don't loads of conservatives get blacklisted? And why, if you're like a moderate Republican who does charity work, why are you still very successful and beloved in Hollywood? But it's not actually being a conservative that makes you run into problems. It's being like an extremist probably, and that's why studios don't want to deal with you. Like I said, you're not talented enough to deal with this because no one's going to have problems if this guy gets cast in something based on his views on gun control or war or veterans and stuff like that, because he's not like a completely hateful far-right figure tweeting loads of crazy stuff like Gina Carano. He just seems like a pretty average conservative dude, and I don't know about you, I don't really have much problems with people like him either making films in Hollywood or being cast in films in Hollywood, because he doesn't seem like a terrible person to be around like so many of these other people do. So in summary, it seems like a lot of conservatives who aren't successful in Hollywood know they can grift off it and basically say, I was not successful because liberal Hollywood ostracized me, not that I'm not talented enough to actually make it in Hollywood. And for people like Brett Cooper and Michael Knowles, it's a nice pivot for money that they can take their acting talent and experience and actually do it as like conservative propagandists. But then you have people like Kevin Sorbo, who were never that talented in the first place, just whining that they could have had a better career if their agent didn't drop them for being a conservative Christian, not that he said tons and tons of unhinged stuff over the years. So in short, Hollywood used to be run completely by conservatives who censored their films, taken over by more liberal artsy places, but it is still this capitalist institution. They still pump out garbage superhero movies all the time for profit, but it's clear they do not want to deal with people on the extreme right anymore. That's why I can believe some people don't get roles, but I think first and foremost, Mel Gibson is evidence that they don't really care about extreme politics. If you are talented enough, sadly, people like Kevin Sorbo, never talented enough to ignore the terrible politics. So anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.